Hello.
Hello.
Oh, good, good. Hey, how's it going? Welcome to another episode of the Rain Race Podcast. It is June 15th. We haven't done an episode of this podcast since the Indianapolis 500 preview episode, which was, I guess, 3 weeks ago at this point. Let's just say had to take a couple weeks off due to some unfortunate circumstances
Yeah,
within
don't
the
don't
confines of
let
where I
Chris say
record
I
this.
had anything to do with this. Don't let Chris say I had anything to do with this. It was all on him.
Well,
It was,
part of it was
'cause
actually because
normally it's scheduling conflicts. This is all your fault. It's not my fault.
okay, but let's just set the bar straight here that 2 weeks ago, I was fully prepared to do a remote episode of this podcast. I wasn't home, and I asked you if you were going to be able to do it. That was going to be the Indy 500 recap episode, and you said that you weren't going to be able to do it. I don't remember the reasoning for that one, but that was a thing. So you can't blame it all on me. I think two of the episodes. Well, how long have we been off? It's been. I think it has been 3 weeks. No, I guess we missed three episodes because the. No, sorry, we only missed two because we were supposed to be doing one June 1st and June
I think that
8th.
was the day after I went to the dirt race at Lawrenceburg,
It
and I had
was.
just gotten home from like 2 weeks of being in Indianapolis. So I was home for the first time in 2 weeks. I don't know what happened after that.
Can't
I think we
spare.
got busy. I think we both got busy. Yeah, that one was
Well,
fair.
no, because I had
The
the issue.
last 2 weeks are just unforeseen circumstances with you.
I had the issue with my basement, which is too confusing to go into at
You
this
gonna
point right now.
you gonna explain it? Because I'm pretty
Uh,
sure I told you
well,
you had to explain this.
well, okay. So if you are unfamiliar, I live in the Northeast. The Northeast is kind of not really known, but it has an issue with. This is going to get pretty scientific here. With radioactive particles in the ground due to the granite and the soil and everything. If you go to New Hampshire, it's called the Granite State. So yeah, I record all these episodes from my basement. That's where all my setup is. And as a result of that, due to certain atmospheric conditions and other variables that I don't want to get too far into, you can research on your own time if you're really interested. Uh, there is a gas called radon, and it is present in the air, and it's no good to breathe. It can cause some lung cancer. And
Basically, if your basement says there's too much radon, then you can't go down there.
I mean, I could, but I don't
So
want to risk some lung cancer over one episode of the Rain Race podcast. Quite frankly, I mean, I love doing this and everything, but
I'm
let's
just
be real
hoping that we
here.
can inspire some people to start researching radon after this. That's what I'm really going for.
Yeah, I mean, if you do have any concerns, you can go buy a checker for it. You know, a little meter. It'll tell you the I don't know the unit is measured in some particulars per I don't know, but anyway, that was a little bit of an off-topic thing to go over. Also, I do want to say that a month from now, around a month from now, 4 or 5 weeks, I would like to switch this over for the YouTube version to have actual video feed of myself and Kyle rather than you staring at a blank screen, as you've seen for the past probably 2 years if you've been paying attention to this podcast, where it's just our logo and the Twitter handle. So yeah, about a month from now, you can check out, look around for that. Hopefully, we'll have a better format for YouTube rather than just a blank screen, and that should be well and nice in its own. Also, I guess the first thing I want to jump into today. Normally, you're not going to find me talking about, I guess NASCAR, a lot of oval racing, unless it's IndyCar, especially short track racing. But this past weekend, this past Saturday night, I was at the uh, first round, I guess, of the Superstar Racing Experience (SRX) over in Stafford, Connecticut, and I just wanted to give a few thoughts on that, if I may, because well, I figured I have to. I sort of have to recap something because, as a result of being at that race, I wasn't able to watch the first IndyCar race, wasn't able to watch the IMSA race, so I feel like I should talk about that rather than having nothing to talk about for those. So if you're unfamiliar, basically, it's sort of if you remember IROC in the United States back a little over 10 years ago now, probably 15-ish years ago. Um, Similar to that in format, kind of. Split up across, what is it, 6 weeks, Kyle? They were going to be doing that this summer. Split up across
There's a lot of races.
short ovals, paved ovals, and a couple of dirt tracks as well. So you have drivers across multiple series in that series. In that championship, you have Marco Andretti as one of them, Bill Elliott, Tony Stewart, Willie T.
Obviously,
Ribbs,
they're not
Paul
really
Tracy, Elio
active
Castro
drivers.
Neves, Tony Kanaan. What did you say there?
So obviously they're not really active drivers. It's just kind of like
Yeah.
superstar racing experience, and it's like Bill Elliott and Willie T. Ribbs and Elio, and yeah, for now.
Yeah. So like I said, I don't really expect to be recapping this every single week, but because I was there, figured I'd give a few thoughts. That
Talk
was
about it every. It's an interesting thing.
Yeah, yeah. That was the second race I had been to post, I guess, the beginning of the pandemic. The first one was Sebring back in March. This one, quite a different dynamic than Sebring. I guess it was the first one that I went to that was sort of a packed house, in quotes. I mean, I guess you can't really pack Sebring to the level that you would have Stafford. But let's just put this out there as a preface. I do not go to short track races.
Yeah,
It's
he
just
never
not
does.
really my cup of tea. You're not going to find me at a dirt track. I got no problem with you
You'll
if you're
find
into
me at a
that.
dirt track,
As much as I love to make jokes to Kyle about dirt racing and everything, if that's your cup of tea, then that's absolutely fine. For me personally, I'm more of a sports car racing guy. I went to this race
obviously.
strictly to go watch some of the drivers. I thought that it was a really cool event. It's only about an hour away from my house as well, so seems like I would be a moron to not go. So yeah, I'm not too familiar with the short track racing scene, but I will say that from people I had talked to at the track there, that was the easily the largest crowd that they would have had in that track in the past decade. Easily, I'm not sure the last time they would have had a sellout crowd like that. I mean, you're not talking tens of thousands of seats at a track like that. I think they sold 10,000 tickets somewhere in the realm, but stands were absolutely packed. And I guess the energy at that track was very impressive as well, given what they
It's one of
usually
those
see at that
things
event.
like short track racing. Have I explained it a little bit? It's one of those things where like when you talk about you can't pack Sebring to the level of Stafford. Obviously, you can fit a lot more people in Sebring, but it's spread out. So like at a short
Right.
track, you know, like I've been to like 6 or 7 dirt races this year alone so far, and I was at Wayne County Speedway last night, in fact. And like at a short track, there's only I don't even know a number to throw out there in seats, but like if you pack the seats, and even though it's a lower amount of seats, in a smaller track, that many people just creates this energy, and it's just yeah, it's one of the coolest things. And with Stafford being a shorter track, and they have seats all the way down the front straight into the corners, and if you just pack all those seats, even if it's like just not even a quarter of the people that are like at like a Sebring, it's the feeling is just incredible.
Yeah, so the main thing that I found interesting about that race is you're at a short track. That's pretty much all of the calendar for SRX. You're not going to have any major tracks like Daytona. I guess trying to think of some other big ovals. I mean, like Texas Motor Speedway, Charlotte, some of those tracks that are really known for having NASCAR Cup races, pretty big, well-funded
Like what
ovals.
IROC used to go to
Yeah,
in the later years.
SRX. I guess the most prominent track you're going to see them go to the entire season is probably, honestly, either Eldora or Knoxville. I don't know which one's regarded as higher in the dirt racing
They're
scene.
kind of the same.
But, you're talking Stafford Motor Speedway. This is one that usually just hosts local modified races. I know the SK Modified Series is primarily what that track is known for. A lot of local guys racing there. But in terms of, even a pretty well strung NASCAR fan, somebody who tunes into the Cup Xfinity races and truck races every weekend, they probably there's a good chance they haven't even heard of Stafford Motor Speedway because it's not really high up there in the national scene. But the thing that I sort of picked out of that, despite not having a huge background with short track racing, is you have a track like that. All the fans there are pretty local. Most of them, that's not their first time being there, and it's a short track, so it has that certain short track aesthetic that you talked about, Kyle. But it's kind of different because it feels like a big event, and I think in most cases because it is a big event. You're talking about something that was broadcasted prime time on
Yeah,
CBS.
CBS
Most of these.
Sports.
No, it was CBS network CBS.
No way.
Did you not know that?
I didn't get it.
I
I
know.
know I didn't get the channel. That was something I just remembered because I tried to look for it. I looked at CBS, and then I don't have CBS Sports.
I figured that you would have picked that up by now, but yeah, that was on primetime network CBS, as the rest of the other races will be. Which that's impressive on its own that they were able to ink that deal because honestly, that's more impressive than a TV deal that you'll see from like IndyCar at the time. But yeah, it had that certain feel of I don't want to say a prestigious race. I'm not going to put it on the same level as Sebring or the Indianapolis 500 or something like that. But it definitely did have a certain energy there that I think is more prominent than you'd see a typical race there. A lot of these shorter tracks you're talking about, coverage for these races are usually on like flowracing.com. I mean, probably viewed by maybe, 100 something people. The attendance, or not the attendance, but the TV viewership for that race, I think was 1.2 million on network CBS. So you could definitely tell the track PA was really trying to amp it up, make sure their track looks very nice in front of that huge TV audience. Um, but yeah, I guess that's just my main takeaway from it. The action in the race itself, you know, you're getting what you expect. I mean, this isn't going to be the most pure racing product in the world. It's meant for TV. It's meant for fun, and I think in that aspect, it really delivered on it quite well. So Kyle, now knowing that you weren't able to watch the race, I know that you don't have too much to talk about with it.
Man,
Um,
I I I mean I couldn't watch it, but I mean I kind of observed the happenings and I
right,
rewatched it back. I didn't watch the whole thing. I just kind of wanted to get the whole gist of it and watch a little bit of it on YouTube.
right.
But I mean it looked fun. Um, there's I mean I guess that's the whole point, right? No points, just a bunch of I wouldn't say current drivers, but it's a bunch of legends and just all overall good drivers going at it in equal cars. I everyone kind of talks about this series being like the new IROC, which I would love to see, an IROC S series like come back. Um, but I mean, the one thing I would love them to do is I'd love them to go to road courses, because that's what
Right.
IROC used to do in the 80s and 90s, and that was way cooler in my opinion than the IROC that we got that only went to ovals in the mid 2000s. Little fun fact there, but yeah, the drivers. I think I don't know this for a fact, but I kind of hope their plan is to kind of morph into getting current drivers from each series. Because I mean that's what IROC was. And while it's awesome, to get to go see Bill Elliott and Willie T. Ribbs and all these guys that you know people like us, Chris, we grew up in the 2000s with Jeff Gordon and Jimmy Johnson. I don't think we didn't get to see Bill Elliott in his prime. We didn't get to see Willie T. Ribbs qualify for the Indy 500. I mean, so getting to actually see these guys race, I mean, is pretty neat. But I do kind of hope they morph this into more of an IROC. It kind of makes sense because I think anyone who is watching IROC who's a current driver, or anyone who is watching this who is a current driver over the weekend, I think they, after seeing what they did, I think they'd be more interested if they weren't interested already. But I mean, it's I can't wait until they get to the dirt events. Because if anyone remembers the Prelude to the Dream when Tony Stewart stuck a bunch of modern drivers that had never raced dirt into a late model and they raced, I have a feeling that's what kind of like what this is going to be. Like I can't wait to see Elio and Kanan and Marco on dirt. That's going to be entertaining. So I mean, it's got a lot of promise. And oh yeah, and Alan Bestwick on the call, man,
Yeah, it's a good
the
pickup.
whole CBS thing was cool.
Well, okay, so a couple things I just want to throw in since you brought them up. Seeing more modern drivers, I think, yeah, that would certainly bring up the appeal a little bit more, I think. Um, but you got to remember that they're running this in the middle of the summer. You're in the middle of NASCAR, you're in the middle of IndyCar. This isn't some winter off-season series that they're running. Um, so I think, scheduling wise, it would be an issue to have full-time drivers taking part in it. Even Paul Tracy is pretty much giving up his NBC IndyCar stuff for the summer to be running these races every weekend because they are 6 weeks consecutively. Um, but I mean, you say that it's a lot of drivers that we didn't get to see race in their prime. I mean, one of those drivers is Elio Castroneves, and I think he won a pretty decent sized race a few weeks ago. So, it's not entirely the retirement home, I would say. I think that they have a pretty good mix um, of drivers that were relevant in their time and drivers that are still relevant today. That's just my take on it. Don't know if you have any rebuttal of that. Um,
Eh, well, I mean, they did it in IROC, I guess is what I'd say.
right.
I
Well,
mean,
okay.
if you have to, you know, the weird thing about IROC, like I said, in the mid 2000s, I believe when they did that, they did it, because it was all like NASCAR ovals, and they did it at points. I'm pretty sure that the IROC would run on NASCAR race week when sometimes stumbling here, but yeah, I think there's a way to do it. I think there's a way you could do it. That get the champions from NASCAR and IndyCar and sprint car racing, NHRA, just get them together and I don't know, I feel like you could do it. I feel like you could find a way
Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe as some
and bring back
one-offs,
road courses.
maybe as some one-offs as well, you could pull that off. And I guess that's kind of what they're doing at Stafford. We had Doug Coby, who's I guess really well known around that track. I believe he came up through the SK Modified Series. Said he ran like 10,000 plus laps of that track. I mean, that's a driver that I myself, quite frankly, hadn't
Yeah,
heard of before that race.
thanks for
And
reminding me of that.
most people hadn't heard of him before that race, but there you go. He sort of just stuck it to the entire field and won the race. And
Yeah, because I thought
that
of
was a
that and
pretty well
I
known
lost
name.
it. But that's another great thing about this series is they're gonna keep doing this. Like I know Bobby Santos and Cody Swanson, I
Right.
believe, are gonna run an IRP, and that's another beautiful thing about this series. And I kind of see what Ray Evernham is thinking here by doing that. And you're gonna be on network CBS, and short track racing in America has kind of fallen a little bit to what it used to be, and especially with the young crowd. Like I guarantee there's a ton of people who had no idea who Doug Coby was before the SRX race, like you. Like you don't know who Doug Coby is.
No.
Um, and they're obviously, as we see now, the favorites going into these races because they've run so many laps of these tracks. So watching, like Cody Swanson, he's going to be pretty tough wherever he races, and seeing him beat up on legends like Tony Stewart and all these. I mean, Brian Brown, I think, is going to be at Knoxville, and he's a Knoxville sprint car native. Nobody really probably knows who Brian Brown is, but I do. And yeah, I mean, he's going to be really good. So I think you could make some new fans. And so if a fan decides to go to the short track after witnessing SRX on CBS, I mean, you're going to go to that short track and you're going to go, hey, that's Doug Coby or that's Brian Brown. That's Cody. Like who these people are now. So I think that's kind of the beauty in all this. Bring some life back to short track racing. Because there's all these home crowd favorites and great talents. To watch on any given weekend. Sometimes in your local area, and just it gets missed out on. So I mean, I'm glad that that's happening.
Yeah, and I guess final thing I'm gonna go on about for this race or this series, a little bit of a call to action. If you do have a race that's popping up near you this summer for SRX, I would recommend going. I mean, as I said multiple times at this point, it's not even my cup of tea. I went there; it was like $40 per ticket. And I think that Stafford was actually a little bit more on the expensive side in terms of the rest of the tracks they'll be running at for tickets. Um, I enjoyed it, so I think it's a good experience. It's fun to go to. Certainly a different dynamic than I'm used to going to all these sports car races, and yeah, I think it was fun. And I'm looking forward to seeing the rest of the 5 races that they put on this summer.
Real quick, going to your
Sure.
Twitter, explain the Budweiser story.
Okay. Yeah, I put out a tweet. Let's see, 20. I mean, I said 20 minutes there. It was probably 20 25 minutes. That wasn't really an exaggeration. Sitting down in the shade, just eating some lunch. I mean, I was there
What
with
were
my
you eating?
brother. I was walking around. Um, but at that point in the day, I don't want to be sitting in the stands. There's nothing
Just
going on.
ignored that.
There's what?
So what were you eating?
Oh, I was eating chicken
This is of
tenders and
interest.
fries, Kyle.
Oh, nice. Was it from
Fed.
the track?
Yeah.
Rate
We're
it. This is another short track thing you're missing out on, the food.
Well, okay, but
Rate it. Rate your
But I don't
chicken
have
tendies.
comparison. But I mean, I'll say it was a solid like 7. I mean, I'm not, or,
Okay, there you go.
six or
Continue.
6.5, 7. Um, but yeah, at that point of the day, when there's nothing going on track, I don't want to be sitting out in the stands. There's quite frankly nothing for me to do. So I find a patch underneath the grandstands. This is where you see how I got hit in the head by a can of Budweiser. Um, but it was really the only shade that you were able to find there, and I was just sitting on some stone underneath, or I guess with my brother, and get hit. I have a hat on, Kimoa hat, and I got hit in the head by a can, an empty can, by
Okay.
the way,
It fell from the
and it was a
stands above
Budweiser.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's your fault.
Well, yeah. I mean, I should have known. I
Yeah,
mean, I because I
what do you
don't get me
think they
wrong, I
do when
see.
they're drinking beer in the stands and the
No,
stands don't like have holes in the bottom? They just, chuck
don't get me wrong.
you just like like slyly like just kind of tap it with your foot and the can just falls.
Oh, I
They
know,
clean it up later.
I
And
know.
don't feel bad because the tracks just pick up those cans and, recycle them for money. So
Well,
it's fine.
I'm
Works out
aware
for
of
them.
this, Kyle. That's not. I mean, I'm not complaining or anything here. I wasn't truly expecting that it would hit me of all people. I mean, you have a grandstand that stretches all the way down the front straightaway. I thought my chances were pretty high to not get struck in the head by a tin can.
They're falling like
But
they're just falling all over the place, man.
no complaints. I guess it's part of the experience.
Welcome to short track racing. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Never an IMSA. I've been going to IMSA races for like 12 years now, and never once has that happened. So 20 minutes was pretty impressive. Anyways, I guess on the topic of IMSA, we'll move it over to some sports car racing. I want to start here with the World Endurance Championship. Now, if you were paying attention 20 minutes ago or so, I did say that I wasn't able to pay attention to most of the races this weekend because of just going to that SRX race. I missed the first IndyCar race, missed IMSA, and I've slept through. You're talking an 8-hour race for Portimao. Let's just be fair and say I slept through 7 hours of it because I got home a little bit late and then just sort of stayed up talking to some people. So, for a race that started at 6 a.m. my time, I did sleep through most of that race. So, unfortunately, I'm not going to sit here and lie and pretend like I have a ton to talk about for this race, but there are a couple things I want to go over. First things first, it's the first race that we saw for the new Glickenhaus Le Mans Hypercar. And, there are some talking points there that I want to get into, so let's just do that. I do believe I had said when we were talking about the Glickenhaus Hypercar at one point in time that their car is pretty obviously more set up for Le Mans, and their program in general is more set up for Le Mans. Now, I've known this because if you pay attention to Glickenhaus's intentions right now, it seems that they're not truly interested in the championship as a whole right now. Jim Glickenhaus himself even said he's not sure what races they're going to be running after Le Mans, so it's, I think quite possible that there are a few races after Le Mans that they don't even end up running. They weren't present at the season opener in Spa. And their car in general set up more for low downforce. You got to remember for this season in the World Endurance Championship, they are not allowed to have the multiple aero kits, I guess, that they've had in the past. I guess in its heyday back in 2015-16, they were allowed 3 different bodywork kits. Then it was down to 2. Now it's just 1. So Glickenhaus, your priority is winning Le Mans. What do you have at Le Mans? You have really long straightaways, not a ton of corners. So your priority is going to be a car that's very slippery down the straights, and you're going to be sacrificing some of the pace at tracks like Portimao, which I think is exactly what happened here. So they were a little bit off the pace, qualified behind a majority of the LMP2 cars. Standard procedural first race for the car, I'd say, in the regards that it had a few issues that they ran into. I think it was mainly the transmission / the clutch. I think they had to replace the clutch mid-race, and that's what cost them basically any shot at being up front near the end of the race. I think Ryan Briscoe was driving the car as well, also came into some contact with the D-Station Aston Martin. So, not a flawless debut for that car, but Portimao certainly was a learning experience for the team, and they only had one car there. The next race at Monzo, which will be around a month from now, they will be running 2 cars for the first time, which is what they will be running at Le Mans. And Monza as well, quite similar in setup to what you would be running at Le Mans. Spa was another one of those low downforce tracks, but Monza in particular is a track that we've seen teams go to in the past to test their Le Mans setups. Audi used to go there all the time, every single year. Audi would be out there testing their Le Mans aero kits. So I think setup-wise, that's going to be a closer representation as to what we can expect at Le Mans. And not only that, but you also have BOP at play, and I guess that's a nice sort of segue into my next topic, which, BOP right now in the World Endurance Championship and Le Mans Hypercar in general actually is, a bit confusing. It's a bit backwards, I think, from what a lot of people are expecting, where, the concept of it is they're trying to slow the fastest cars down to the pace of the slowest cars, which is, that's pretty standard procedure for balance of performance. That's what we've seen across, every other class they've tried it with over the past, I don't know how many years. The issue with Le Mans Hypercar and using that protocol is every single time you do that, you're sort of pushing them further and further back into the grasp of LMP2 pace, which is a topic that we had after Spa. And, it is a push in the wrong direction, I think. Now, most people that I've seen online have said, okay, well, how about you just speed up the Glickenhaus? If the Glickenhaus is slower than the Toyota and the Alpine, how about we just speed them up? Let's give them more power. Especially because Glickenhaus themselves said the car was rated to run at 700 something horse. I don't know, it was rated to run higher than they're actually running in race trim. So let's just give them more horsepower, or let's take some weight away from their car, which I think that's the logical step to go towards. Unfortunately, as you speed cars up, you do run into the potential concern of reliability, more than just slowing the other cars down. I think that that's something they're going to have to look into. I said during Spa that I don't think the gaps in the cars in terms of LMP2 and the Le Mans hypercars is going to be as strong at Le Mans, because Le Mans, you have really long straightaways, and the LMP2 cars do have significantly less power than the hypercars do right now. So down the straightaways, I'd expect the hypercars to have at least 5 seconds on the LMP2 cars. That's my hope, which is nowhere near what we used to see. In fact, it actually might be a little bit less than 5 seconds, come to think of it. But I think that that's the goal right now, and I'll be curious to see if they speed those cars up before Le Mans as well. Got more than a couple actually chat messages running in here, so let's just see if I if I can run through some of these. JG, I gave you updates for IMSA. I know. I'm going to get into IMSA in a little bit here. Yeah, Glickenhaus with a big disappointment. I wouldn't call it, I don't think it's fair to call it a big disappointment. I think everybody, including Glickenhaus themselves, treated Portimao as sort of, let's just use this as our debut race. Let's use this as a chance to find out where the car is running its faults in race configuration. And it was quite a nice race to do that as well. I mean, you have an 8-hour race. It's more than a typical 6-hour World Endurance Championship race. You're talking 1/3 race distance for Le Mans there. And, we have seen far worse debuts, I think it's fair to say. They weren't too far down on pace. They were only a couple miles per hour down on top speed from the Toyotas and the Alpines. And, all you need to do is look back at some of the cars like the Nissan GTR LM Nismo, or the Aston Martin AMR1 that I made a video about. And you'll see that it actually wasn't really a disastrous debut. Alpine is getting robbed every race. They obviously have the fastest hypercar, in quotes, yes, because it is an LMP1 car. Alpine's a little bit interesting because they have the pace, I think, to beat the Toyotas. In fact, I'm going to go out on a limb and say on one lap pace, they have the fastest car overall, which brings up the question of, what are you trying to balance right now? Because my biggest curiosity is what they're going to do with the Toyota going into Monza, if they're going to slow that car down even more, or if they're just going to sort of leave everything where it is right now, maybe give the Glickenhaus a little bit more pace. Because I think on one lap pace, the Alpine is probably a little bit quicker, and the true intention of balance of performance is to make sure that the cars are equal on pace, not equal on results. As we saw with the success ballast last year, which was a complete disaster, and I could rant all day about the success ballast if I really wanted to. But when you have cars that are similar on pace, I guess you can look at how they run over a stint. It's different to compare one lap versus an entire stint or an entire 8-hour endurance race. But I don't think Alpine is really struggling that much from a lack of pace. It's that they're less experienced as a team, I guess, than Toyota is, especially running in the top category. And I think that that's what's been hurting them more than their overall pace. So, quite frankly, I wouldn't be too surprised if there was no difference between those cars or I guess no changes between those two cars to make the Alpine a little bit faster for Monza. At least that's what I would expect, given the true intentions in quotes of balance of performance. Uh, yeah, I want the Alpine to have a fair BOP, but I can see why they're not. Um, yeah, I mean, I would have to look further into that. I guess that's something I could do for the next episode or one after that as well. Is really just sort of dive into the stint average laps and see where they were losing their time, because you look at some of the practice sessions and they were actually the fastest hypercar out there. So yeah, I might have to look into that at some point. Yeah, the Glickenhaus clutch issue was from the contact. I was thinking that that was the case. I just couldn't remember because I hadn't seen it live. Um, and I didn't want to say that without any confirmation. So yeah, the Glickenhaus transmission issue that they ran into was was from the contact with that D station Aston Martin in GTE AM. All right. Next thing I want to talk about for Portimao, because as I said, I can't talk about the entire race itself, but at the end of the race, it was apparent that Toyota was exercising some team orders across their two cars, the 7 and the 8 car. And I just gotta say, Kyle, I don't know, you are pretty quiet when it comes to me talking about the World Endurance Championship because you haven't followed it as closely as I have in years at this
I
point.
did the same thing as you this weekend where I just slept.
Well, that's fair because I think you were actually up later than I was the night before. But Toyota at the end of the race, I guess I'll just tell this for you too, Kyle, was sort of just switching the positions when it came to the 7 and the 8 car. Now, Toyota's old strategy when it came to team orders is traditionally the car that came into the pits, or I guess the car that exited the pits at the very end and was in front at the end of the last pit cycle, was basically told by Toyota, okay, you're going to be the car that wins the race. They switched it up for this one. They wanted to try to see which car had the faster pace overall, or which car had better pace at the end of the race to try to go for the win. And then once they were able to find that out, they said, okay, you can go ahead and go for the win here. Now, the issue that I have with that is that I think it shows a real severe lack of trust between the Toyota teams, the 7 and the 8 team. And there's a reason why. I'm going to get into that in a second. But in the end, the number 8 car ended up winning the race overall for the second time in a row. And the issue that I have with it, as I just said, I think it shows a real lack of trust, is that Toyota didn't really have a lot to lose in this race. I mean, at that point in the race, they have a minute lead over Alpine. They can afford to make a couple of mistakes. Maybe the 7 car forces the 8 wide, and there's an issue. I do think there is a time and a place for team orders. We've seen it for decades at this point across F1. It's really sort of made its way into endurance racing over the past, maybe the past decade. But it's really become mainstream, I think, with Toyota, which I think is extremely disappointing. We've seen in the past what teammates can do if you really sort of let them go loose at each other. I think the best example of that's probably 2016 with the 2 Corvettes at the end of the Rolex 24 when they just put on that phenomenal finish. And, when it comes to Portimao...
When it comes to Portimao...
Sorry, got interrupted there. When it comes to Portimao, this isn't Le Mans. This isn't the biggest race of the year. And I certainly think that they could have afforded to just let those 2 cars race. Now, example of where that works well is you were able to see the 2 Jota cars battling for the win in LMP2 in the exact same race at the exact same time. No team orders were found in that finish for the LMP2 win. At least none to my knowledge. It looked like they were putting on a pretty substantial battle. And I think it ended up quite well for them, and they put on a really exciting race. But I think Toyota's habit, I guess, of getting into team orders, to the point where it's just sort of ritual at this point that we'll have team orders at the end of the race with them. You don't have a lot of talking points in Hypercar this season, unfortunately. I mean, we have three manufacturers at this point. But let's be honest, Toyota still does have the dominant program right now. They have the experience. They know what they're doing. And if you're going to have any major talking points or any real exciting finishes this season, I think it's going to be between team cars, and most likely in that case Toyota. I think it's a real shame when you see sort of you get a guarantee of which car is going to win, maybe 10 minutes from the finish, even though the drivers are only half a second between each other, which I think is quite disappointing. And I wish that they would sort of turn the tables on that one and let the drivers race each other. I mean, certainly Toyota is entitled to do whatever they want, but I'm just looking back into the past into some of the monstrous LMP1 battles we've had, even between teammates, and it's a disappointment for me, I think. And I know I'm not alone in that as well. I've seen quite a few people frustrated with Toyota just sort of turning that into a habit. So that's really all I have. It was a slight rant about Toyota and their tactics at the end of the race. So I just want to go back to the couple of chat messages. Why do the hypercars get less power for Le Mans? Less power in terms of, like, I guess I'm gonna need clarification on that. Less power in like compared to where they were at Portimao or where they are. I don't know. I'm gonna need some clarification on that one. Yeah. Oh, okay. So yeah, you already clarified. I just didn't read further enough down. Yeah, they get less. I think it's less. I'd have to read into that because it has been a while. But yeah, they do get less overall power at Le Mans than they do at some of the other just endurance races, the shorter, not sprint races, but you know what I mean. And I think it's strictly because of the size of Le Mans and the size of the straightaways that you have. I think it's just to slow the cars down a little bit. But I do remember reading up on that now, actually, at this point. So, yeah, completely caught me off guard with that. Fuel disadvantage for Alpine. Yeah, that's where I'd have to look into the entire race and the stint schedule. So like I said, maybe I'll do that for the next podcast, but I really do have to research into that one. Fuel capacity allowed under LMA hypercars higher than the max LMP1 fuel loads. Yeah, I do believe I remember reading that as well. Yeah, so Toyota has outpaced, or Alpine has outpaced Toyota in both races. They just have a major fuel disadvantage. Yeah, I'm going to have to look into the stints, like I said, for the next podcast. Maybe I'll break that down a little bit and see exactly how many laps they're losing. Because I really am curious where Alpine was losing a minute at the end of the race. Because they actually were leading in the final hour. They just had to make that extra pit stop, and that's really what cost them. So, unfortunately, I don't want to talk too much more into it because, as you can tell, I'm a little bit uneducated with Portimao this past weekend. I wasn't able to research it quite as much as I would have wanted to. But Monza is coming up next. I believe the date's July 16th. I want to make sure. No, it would be July 18th, I believe, is the next race. And then, of course, we have Le Mans right after that. So I will be researching and I guess paying a lot more attention at Monza as to what's going on in that class, because I think that's going to be the greatest indication as to what we can expect for Le Mans in August. So there's a comment there, but I actually want to get back to that later on, Connor, because I'll be discussing that a little bit later in the episode. But Kyle, I do want to give you a chance to talk here because you were paying attention to both IndyCar races. So I'm going to turn the table over to you to just give a quick recap of the first and I guess second IndyCar races at Detroit this past weekend.
Quick.
Well, there's a lot to talk
Detroit
about.
Was
but
great.
There's a lot to talk about, but I'm saying sort of abbreviate a little bit because.
So, Detroit was something. It was crazy. Just there was so much. So obviously the doubleheader. So race number 1, everything was going as normal. It was a weird strategy this weekend because the red tires did not work. So you had guys pitting within 5 laps. I missed the start and I tuned on like lap 7. I think half the field had already pitted, and I was so confused. But then we get into the race, and I don't know when it was, probably like 40, 20, 30. But there was a huge accident in race number one. Don't remember what corner number exactly, but Felix Rosenquist had a stuck throttle and entering a corner. So did all he could do, but knocked the wall down. The fence was on its side, and he went through like three tire barriers, and car was up in the air, and it was pretty terrifying to say the least. But uh, thankfully, Rosenquist was conscious. No injuries that we know of. And he spent the night in the hospital. Yeah, no broken bones. I don't believe I've heard anything about a concussion. I believe from all the reports I've read and everything that they've gone through, that Felix Rosenquist is fine. He had to spend the night in the hospital though, and he did have a replacement driver for race number two. But yeah, that was a very terrifying incident, and it was you don't see stuck throttles a lot in IndyCar, and I believe I've only seen it one other time, but yeah, it was just um, yeah, that was huge. So obviously that was a huge red flag. Took about an hour and a half to do that until that was lifted, and then get going into the race. And like I said, weird strategies. I think a lot of guys got caught out by their, a red flag, let alone, a yellow. They got caught out, and the field kind of shifted. And with about 20, 15 laps to go, we get to this battle where Will Power's leading. Marcus Ericsson is in second. I think VK might have been third. Um, but the stars of the show were Will Power and Marcus Ericsson, and those two, it was such a fun battle. They were just, you could tell they were pushing with everything they had for that went on for like 20 laps. It was like 30 to go, and they were in the same place with 10 to go. It was insane just how hard they were pushing and how close to each other they were. And you could tell that Will Power had just a slight advantage on Ericsson, and that Power was probably going to win. But then with, I think it was 5 to go, 4 to go, Roman Grosjean, who was having an all right day. I believe he was inside the top 10. Maybe not in race one, but he was having an all right day. And he ended up hitting the wall with 5 laps to go, which obviously in IndyCar, we don't have green, white checkers. Caution laps do count. So that looked like it was going to be the end of the race. We were going to finish under yellow. But IndyCar did the thing that IndyCar does, and they threw a red flag so we could get a green flag finish, which is, I don't know how everyone else feels about that. It's a little bit controversial on whether or not they should throw a red flag to finish the race. But they've done it before. They did it in the Indy 500, in fact. So they did it in 2014. I believe this has happened literally at Detroit before. But yeah, they threw the red flag with 5 to go to get a green flag finish. Um, and then as if the race wasn't entertaining enough at the end, Will Power, when they went to restart the cars, Will Power's car did not fire. There was an issue with the ECU, which Will Power claimed that the heat got to it and melted the ECU or did something in the heat that didn't allow it to start back up. But today there was actually an article that came out that the ECU, just when the car was shut down, uh, so these ECUs apparently have a thing where if the car shuts down in any way that the ECU doesn't like, it'll basically go into boot mode and kind of just restart, just like your PC would. So yeah, the when the car shut off, it sensed something it didn't like, it wasn't like a normal shutdown procedure within the car, within the engine, and so it put the ECU into boot mode. So then when they refired it, they had a bunch of stuff to go through, and obviously couldn't get it started on time. So the rest of the field leaves the grid without Will Power. Marcus Ericsson, leader. Marcus Ericsson goes on to win his first ever IndyCar race, which is pretty wild. Man, it was so conflicting because on one hand, Will Power had the race won. He was better. But on the other, I mean, you just had to be so happy for Marcus Ericsson, man. Like that's such a cool victory. He's been right there on breaking through and getting podiums and wins. And to see him finally get his first win is pretty cool. He's like eighth in the championship right now, too. I mean, he's just so consistent. He's been right there. He's in a Ganassi ride. The 8 car for Ganassi finally got a win. That's pretty cool. But I mean, yeah, I want to go back to the red flag because I I don't know how I feel about it. I really don't know how I feel about it. I don't I don't hate it like some people do. I don't love it either. I agree with it in a sense that I mean, you do want to get a green flag finish. I mean, at the Indy 500, could kind of get it if it's like if you just need a quick sort of resolution to do this. But I mean, it's still you're basically fabricating a finish, and it's just Chris, how do you feel about throwing red flags at the end? I want to hear your opinion on this. I need
Well,
a second.
this comes back to IndyCar always getting flack when they let a race end under yellow, because that
Yeah,
was very apparent at the Indy 500 last year. When that race ended under yellow, I think it was like 2 laps to go and that yellow came out last year, wasn't it?
yeah, something like
And
that.
yet some people were still saying, okay, well, are we able to throw a red flag to get a green flag finish here? Like at that point, it's extremely unrealistic.
One lap
Um,
shootout.
but yeah, I mean, it's not uncommon for IndyCar though to throw a red flag at the end of the race. They've done it before. They did it in 2014 at the Indy 500 to guarantee a green flag finish, or at least get a better chance at a green flag finish. Um, so
I mean, it was controversial then too, because the
yes,
reason they did that, if you remember in the Indy 500, we had this thing from like I don't from like 2007 all the way to 2012 or 2013. We didn't have a green flag finish. Technically 2011 still under yellow, guys. But yeah, there was just a huge span of not having green flag finishes, and I feel like IndyCar felt like if they didn't get a green flag finish in 14, then the people were going to start rioting. But I mean,
but
that
okay.
was the only time they've done it
Here's a question I have for you
at the
then.
500.
Here's a question I have for you then. Would we be talking about this right now if Will Power's car wasn't able to get refired?
Maybe. I mean,
I don't
I
think we
guess
would.
we'd still be talking about how pointless it is, though. I think.
Well, I'm going to respectfully disagree on that one. I don't think people would have really made a fuss about it if Will Power's car wasn't able to get refired. That's just where I'm going to stand on it. I mean, look, I'm not going to sit here and endorse it. Quite frankly, I don't care if a race ends under yellow. And I was just talking about this later today, I guess in a group chat with you and a few other people. But there's maybe this is me being the sports car racing guy, and not really growing up with that sort of NASCAR mindset, for lack of a better term. But I personally don't care if a race ends under a yellow flag or a safety car. To me, it ran the advertised distance. You're not going to have a side by side exciting finish every single race. Um, Sometimes that's what happens. And personally, I don't have an issue with it. I know a lot of people, though, and I mean a lot of people, it's to the point where it's almost even a turnoff, to the point where they don't even want to watch the series if they can't get a guaranteed green flag finish. And, I guess there's two opposite ends of the spectrum. I can only give my opinion from my side, but, I think IndyCar, they've caught a lot of flack in the past for letting races end under yellow when I guess they didn't really have to. And there's always been a call for them to just throw a red flag when it's at the end of the race so they can try to get a green flag finish. So, I think the backlash if they didn't do it probably would have outweighed the backlash that they're getting right now. Um, but that's just my opinion on it.
I think at least, I mean, I guess I'd feel. What I kind of thought is you should have. I mean, it's obviously not in the rule book, so I understand why they didn't. But if a car doesn't start like Will Powers, I mean, it's not. It's not the team's fault. It's not Will's fault. It was ECU. It was an ECU issue. I mean, maybe give him time to figure it out because he was back on track within 5 minutes, and that just I don't know. I feel like that. I know it could have happened to anyone, everyone. The race is the same, but I don't know. It doesn't. it doesn't sit well. It's that I hate that the finish of race number one doesn't sit well because the first win for Marcus Ericsson is pretty cool, but at the same time, yeah, have a guy lead that many laps and obviously be have the best car, have the best, and it's not an issue that it's honestly not even an issue that they could have avoided. There's nothing they could have done at all, and yeah, that doesn't sit right. A little, it's interesting. But let's go to race number two. Um, to be honest, like I don't the highlight of race number two is the finish. So let's go straight to the finish. Honestly, the ending here probably one of the best finishes in IndyCar I've seen in a long time. Like Detroit has this thing about it. I It's been since 2019, obviously because of the pandemic, that we've gotten to go to Detroit, and I forgot how much I love this track. It's a street course, but it's so quick and so brutal with the bumps that it feels like a short oval in street course form. It's pretty amazing, just to watch. And we had at the very end, we had a 4 or 5 car battle, just 5 cars under a blanket. Joseph Newgarden, Pato O'Ward, Rinus VK, Takuma Sato, just those 4 guys, and that's not even in order. Just those 4 guys, just right there, and everyone was just pushing as hard as they could, and it came down to a late race restart. And then once again, before the restart, it was looking like it was going to be an awesome finish, even without it. But you know, once again, issues for Roman Grosjean. Car, the brakes catch on fire. Grosjean puts out the fire himself, like an absolute legend. I know all the marketing people at IndyCar are going to be using that for the rest of the year. But yeah, another late race restart. And somehow, like I said, not even in order. I believe Pato O'Ward was like fifth or fourth in the line. And on the restart, he just drove his way up the field and took the lead from Joseph Newgarden. Awesome battle. Made contact on the back straight. And then once Pato got by Newgarden, Pato was gone because Newgarden, like I said, the Reds were terrible, and Newgarden made his last stop on lap 20, and his final stint was the Reds because I believe he didn't use the Reds until the final stop of the day. So then by the end of the stint, by the end of the race, with final couple laps to go, Newgarden's tires were just absolutely shot, and there's no way he was going to catch Pato, and somehow in some way he fended off Rinus VK, or no, Alex Palou for third. My bad. And then Rinus VK, I believe, was fourth, and then Graham Rahal in fifth. But I mean, yeah, what a race! Detroit, what a weekend! I mean, and also the special shout out to the super sub for Felix Rosenquist, Oliver Askew. A little bit of a surprise there. Returned to his former car from 2020, the 7 car for Arrow McLaren SP. Showed up wearing Alex Palou's racing boots that he borrowed, Juan Pablo Montoya's suit, which Askew's like 6'2", and Montoya's like 5'7", so he's somehow squeezed into Montoya's suit. Alex Palou's shoes. Thankfully, he brought his helmet, like a lad who doesn't have a ride and goes to the races does. He always bring her helmet and his gloves. And yeah, shows up without not having raced at this track because they didn't race here last year in his rookie year. They didn't race at lights when Askew was in lights either. Shows up to a track he's never seen, and he ran lap times just right with the rest of the field because IndyCar's lap times are spread top to bottom by like a second. He was running right in that threshold, and if it wasn't for an issue with the engine on that car, I believe Askew probably would have just gotten away with a top 15 on Sunday, just having jumped in the car, and that's very impressive. Wasn't a shiny day, and if you weren't paying attention to Askew, you probably wouldn't have noticed. But man, that was pretty impressive for Askew. And so after race number 2, there's a lot of things to talk about in IndyCar. I'm pretty amped about IndyCar right now. A lot of storylines heading into Road America, especially because it's a 17 race season, and we just passed rounds 8 and 9, so we're right in the middle of the season. And with Pato O'Ward's win on Sunday and Palou finishing third, Pato took the points lead from Palou and he's currently leading by one single point. And going into Road America, it's especially interesting because if you remember right, last year we had the double headers at Road America, and in race number one, when Alex Palou was racing for Dale Coyne with Team Go, he finished third, his first ever podium in IndyCar, and he looked especially strong at Road America. He claims it's his favorite track. And if you remember race number two, Pato O'Ward took the pole and led the most laps, led all but I think like 8 throughout the entire day. And that race ended in a closing laps battle between him and Felix Rosenqvist, who was driving the 10 car, the car that Alex Palou is now in. So you got two guys who were clearly very good at Road America, and the two cars in the last time we raced there, who were obviously the best two cars, and 1 and 2 in the championship. It's just choose your fighter, guys. Alex Palou, Pato O'Ward, battle the young guns in the championship points. We got an awesome weekend coming up in Road America. I'm super excited. Yeah, I think it's going to be a great rest of the season. In fact, for IndyCar, I think we're really with double points. I think the top 10 is still right there, and at the halfway point, anyone I would say inside the top 5 has a great shot at the title. Scott Dixon and Newgarden are still lurking. It's just yeah, everything's on the up right now in IndyCar, and I'm so excited.
Yeah, good stuff. Good. But who had their money on Award and Palou being the top two in the championship like
I think a
mid-season?
lot of people had Palou, well, not Palou, but that's the opposite. I think a lot of people had Pato. I think everyone was kind of thinking that, with how many great performances Pato had last year and how good Arrow McLaren looked in testing, I think a lot of people had this expectation for Pato. But Palou is the guy who really, I don't even think Chip Ganassi, his own team, knew what they had going into the season. They had to find a quick replacement for Rosenquist, and he was the best hotshot young gun available. And goes out, wins the first race of the season, and he's been so consistent. I mean, the first hurdle for everybody, but more Palou, the first hurdle of the year with the Indy 500 double points has been crossed, and he made the most out of it with a second place finish. I, I mean, we're past Indy, so I think I can say for a fact that I think Palou is actually a legit, title contender halfway through the season. And we'll see if I eat those words because it's only halfway. Uh, he's still got, the whole second half to make me eat my words there. But I mean, I think he's legit.
But the funny thing is that usually in IndyCar, towards the opening rounds of the season, we see the rookies are. I don't want to call them rookies because they're not rookies anymore. But let's just call them the young guns in quotes. They're usually very strong at the beginning of the season, but towards the middle, they usually fall victims to sort of the likes of Scott Dixon or Joseph Newgarden, one of those guys. But I think in this season, we've almost seen the rookies just get strong. I call them rookies again, not rookies, but the young guys are getting stronger. It seems as we get towards the middle part of the season. I don't know if you've picked up on that, but that's something that I think sort of stands out this season.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I mean, VK is only getting better. Which, by the way, with VK, there's some news there. Some bad news. So today, while he was training on his bike, sustained an injury to his collarbone, broken collarbone for Renus VK, and he hasn't been ruled out yet, but they're pending what's going to happen for VK going into Road America. But I mean, VK getting his first win, very strong Detroit, looked very strong at the 500. Uh, he's definitely stepped it up. I mean, I don't know how young we'd call Jack Harvey. He stepped it up this year. I think I've been really impressed with him. Marcus Ericsson, he's not young, but you know what I mean. The newer guys to
Yeah,
IndyCar,
yeah.
Grosjean, you know, they're all just kind of stepping it up. And so here's something I don't know if you've thought about this yet, but have you realized that Team Penske hasn't won a single race this year?
I've quietly realized that, yes, and I've also quietly realized that Scott Dixon's only won one. So
I mean, Will Power still without a win. Newgarden has come painfully close. Pagano, I mean, the McLaughlin's been doing well too. That's someone I just thought of. But I mean, you're right. The newer guys. are really starting to step it up halfway here.
Yeah, and as you said, Road America up next. You'll be there, and I'll be watching to sort of try to fill in the gaps.
I believe I'll be
So
at the next 5 IndyCar races, is what I
that's
realized. Because do you also
nuts.
realize that after Mid Ohio on July 4th weekend, that we don't get any IndyCar racing the rest of July?
Mm. Yep. There's your. Well, you didn't get it after the season opener, so there's your long gap right there. But yeah, I don't know. I think that's enough covered for IndyCar. Obviously, 2 races to cover, so we gave it a little bit more time. But yeah, let's just recap again real quick. Pato O'Ward points leader over Alex Palou by 1 point, followed by Scott Dixon, who's 36 points down. Joseph Newgarden in fourth, and VK is in fifth. And yeah, that's where they stand. Approaching, if not at the midway point of the season now. I do want to jump real quick back because I'm gonna be kicking myself all night if I don't. Because I sort of butchered the end of the WEC section with my lack of knowledge, and I do want to just clarify a couple of things, just to sort of save face. So yeah, I've been told by a couple of people at this point that Alpine's greatest struggle was with their fuel runs. Just tried to look into that a little bit. Unfortunately, I can't do the stint breakdowns like I usually can, just because the service doesn't allow it for the WEC races. But at the end of the day, Alpine did 9 pit stops compared to 8 from the number 7 Toyota and 7 from the number 8, which that's a little bit confusing. But yeah, 7 from the race winner, 8 from the number 7 car, and 9 from the Alpine. So yeah, I guess that is where they're losing all their time. I unfortunately, having missed quite a bit of Spa and having missed most of Portimao, wasn't able to pick up on that, so I apologize about that. And then the power cut that I sound audibly confused about, I know it was an issue, not an issue, but I know that it was a thing with the LMP1 hybrids, that they were running less power at Le Mans. I think it was really just in terms of less hybrid power that they were allowed to use, and that's why they were a little bit slower than I guess they would have been had they been running the same trim that they were at the sprint races, in quotes sprint. But I'm not sure if that carried over to the Le Mans hypercars, so I do want to get clarification on that. And if I do get some, I will obviously correct myself. But I don't want to go out right now and say that they have less power than these sprint races, because quite frankly, I'm not positive on that. Anyways, Kyle, were you able to watch the IMSA race this weekend?
No.
No. Sure
This
you.
weekend was my dad's 50th birthday
Oh,
party,
really?
man.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, IMSA ended up starting late because of that IndyCar red flag. It ended up starting pretty much an hour late, actually. And look, I'm not gonna, I can't really fake it here. Obviously, I wasn't able to watch the race, so I think it's only fair that we recap the race winners across 3 classes. Obviously, there was no LMP2 or LMP3 at this race, but we did have the addition of GTLM. However heavily you want to weight that, because there were 2 Corvettes in the class and nobody else. It was an exhibition race for that class, no points on the line, because GTLM was originally supposed to be in Le Mans this past weekend, except they weren't, because that is happening in August now. So, in DPI, the number 01 Chip Ganassi Racing Cadillac finally picking up a win after not even being on the podium for the other races in the opening rounds of the season. So, I talked about that in one of the previous episodes, that it was really just sort of a heartbreaking start of their season. They were finally able to turn it around, pick up a win, Renger van der Zande and Kevin Magnussen. From what I was able to follow on live timing, it looks like, they were the best car, I think, that weekend at that track. Put it on pole as well. Cadillac in general always seems pretty strong at the street circuits, especially Detroit. And I think that's sort of just down to how their cars are set up with a naturally aspirated V8. I think it puts the power down a little bit smoother on the street circuits, given how bumpy they are. Oh, that's just my take on it overall, at least. But second place was the 31 Action Express Whelen Engineering Cadillac, Felipe Nasr and Pippo Durrani. Third was the Wayne Taylor Racing Acura, Ricky Taylor and Felipe Albuquerque. The 55 Mazda was fourth. The number 5 Mustang Sampling JDC Cadillac was fifth. And the 60 Meyer Shank Racing Acura was sixth. GTLM, the number 4 Corvette, took the race win over the number 3 Corvette. Not too much else to talk about there. That was actually the first race with 2 Corvettes competing in a class by themselves since the GT1 days, actually. Believe it or not. I believe that was back in 2009 was the last time we saw that. So, because I'm trying to remember, there was a crossover between GT1 and GT2 mid-season. I think it was 2009. Although I'm trying to remember if that was 2009 or 2010, but I'm 75% sure it's 2009. GTD, though, was quite a different story. We had 12 cars in that class. And the number... Okay, so this is actually where we get a little bit interesting. The number 39 Carbon Audi actually won the race overall, but then ended up getting moved to the back of the field. They ended up finishing 12th in the official results because of a post-race penalty. I'm going to try to pull up what that post-race penalty was. I saw it and I completely forgot. But the official winner of the race was the number 23 Heart of Racing Aston Martin GT3, followed by the number 19 Grasser Racing Lamborghini, the 66 Gradient Racing Acura, and the 2 Lexuses rounded out the top 5. It was the 14 and then the 12 car. The GTD race winner was disqualified due to being under the minimum refueling time for the GTD class. 40 seconds is the minimum GTD refueling time, and don't know if we have an actual amount of time that they were under by, but they didn't meet that minimum refueling time and therefore were disqualified, which is obviously a big shame. That team actually pretty new to IMSA, at least the WeatherTech Championship, moving up from the Pilot Challenge. So I believe they're running the entire IMSA sprint race schedule in the GTD class. So real shame for them. They had the win, but unfortunately lost it. And yeah, I don't think there's too much else I can talk about for the IMSA race at Detroit. Unfortunately, I'd love to talk about it more, but I wasn't able to watch it live, and I should have watched the highlights in retrospect, but unfortunately haven't gotten around to doing that yet. The next race, though, will be, I guess, next weekend. Yeah, let's call it next weekend. At Watkins Glen, the Salem 6 Hours, one of the endurance races, one of the 4 endurance races on the IMSA calendar. I will be there. Kyle, will you be there? I'm going to throw you under the bus here if you don't. All right, we'll get a nice solid maybe on that for now. But yes, I will be at that race. So that'll be quite fun. Hoping for a Mazda win. I've been, sort of trying to put myself in a nice position to see Mazda win once before they pull out of the series. But, who knows? Watkins Glen might be a good chance for that. They won it back in 2019. And we will get the addition, as somebody brought up in the chat, of the Ally Cadillac, the second Action Express Racing Cadillac, the number 48 at that race, as they are running the entire endurance schedule. So we will have Jimmy Johnson and Kamui Kobayashi in that car for Watkins Glen. Sad that Mazda broke their podium streak. Yeah, actually, I didn't really expect Detroit to be a very strong race for them. Typically, the street circuits aren't, unfortunately. But, we are going into a stretch of the season where I think they have the potential to be very strong. They've been strong at the past in Watkins Glen. Now we get a sprint race at Watkins Glen as well the following weekend, which I will not be attending. I will only be at the 6 hour. And then we will be going to Road America throughout the summer. Normally, we'd be going to Canadian Tire Motorsports Park, MoSport, in place of that second race at Watkins Glen. But unfortunately, COVID restrictions are preventing that this year. So that's where we're getting the second Watkins Glen race from. And yeah, I think IMSA, we still have a very interesting middle section of the season coming up. I want to pull up the points real quick, actually, if I may. Just to quickly recap what the point situation looks like in that series. It is still Felipe Albuquerque and Ricky Taylor in the Wayne Taylor Racing Acura. That is holding the points lead in that right now. Get ready for it. 1,398 points followed by the 55 Mazda at 1,327, and the 31 Cadillac at 1,270. And I guess I'll just go over fourth and fifth at this point. The 01 Chip Ganassi Racing Cadillac in fourth at 1,219, and the number 5 JDC Cadillac in fifth with 1,211. So yeah, points didn't change in the GTLM class because, as I said, it was an exhibition race. So I'm not really going to go over... Well, I guess I'll quickly go over the points in that class. The number 3 Corvette, still the championship leader in that class at 697 points. The number 79 Porsche.
I would hope so. I'd hope they'd still be the championship leaders.
79 Porsche is second at 656. And surprisingly, the 24 BMW is third at 653, although we can expect that to fall because they are not competing in all of the races this year. So the number 4 Corvette, which is sitting at 647 points, should be overtaking them. And then finally, GTD. I'll just go over the top 3 in that one as well. We have the 96 Turner Motorsport. Actually, you know what? I didn't realize that Detroit actually wasn't a points-paying event for GTD either, which is actually interesting. Once again,
Confusing.
an uneducated moment for me.
Why do you think a bunch of GTD teams didn't show up?
That's a good point. But yeah, you know, I can rant about that as well, about IMSA's points getting a little bit too confusing compared to what they were 5 years ago, but I'll save that for a rainy day. 96 Turner Motorsport BMW in first at 920 points, followed pretty closely behind by the 23 Heart of Racing Aston Martin at 913, and the number 16 Wright Motorsports Porsche at 874 points. All right, I think that's all the race recaps out of the way. You know, we've been off the air for 3 weeks, as I had said. There are some big races that we missed. Unfortunately, we didn't get to recap the Indy 500, but at this point, that would be pretty redundant, so I'm not going to jump into it. And quite frankly, if I spend another second doing race recaps this episode, I'm just going to end this entire podcast for good. So let's jump into the main topic for this episode. Yeah, you've waited an hour and 12 minutes for it, but the... oh, yeah, quick correction. The... because, you know, I blundered this again. The GTD points at Detroit were for the Sprint Cup, not the full season. So thank you, Andrew, for correcting me on that one. All right. Where was I? Okay, right. The main story in this episode. BMW has officially confirmed their intention to do a Le Mans, I guess, LMDh program. We still don't know what the H stands for. So, yeah, an LMDh program starting in 2023. You know, this was actually kind of a surprise announcement. I was just sort of roaming Twitter one day, as I do, and saw that there was a post on there from the CEO of the BMW M Division. Somebody posted a screenshot from his Instagram saying, "We are back Daytona 2023," with a picture of the BMW V12 LMR that raced in 1999. Actually won Le Mans in 1999. And, you know, at the time, I didn't know how much to think about it because, quite frankly, I didn't know who it was that posted it. Look into it a little bit, and I think it's a pretty credible source. You know, when you have the CEO of the BMW M Division posting that, you know, unless he's just trying to get a nice laugh, which I don't think would be very corporate friendly in the first place, you know, immediately sort of grabbed my attention. It's not the most common way I've seen an LMDh program announced, but certainly up there is interesting. And then the next day we got official confirmation from BMW themselves saying, yes, we will be building a car for the LMDh regulations for a debut at Daytona in 2023. There's a couple questions that announcement brought up, mainly because it didn't go too in depth. In fact, their press release as a whole was actually rather short. I'd have to pull it up if I wanted to read it, but I'll just go into a couple of questions that it left unanswered. The main thing I'm wondering is if they're going to be racing in the World Endurance Championship and if they're going to be racing at Le Mans. Quite frankly, I'm more concerned about Le Mans than the World Endurance Championship as a whole. But let's just go with what we know here. BMW historically in sports car racing has had a better relationship in the United States than they have worldwide, in a worldwide championship, that is. You've been able to tell that from their GTE programs over the past 20 years. You know, they've had a very strong, long lasting partnership with Ray Hall Letterman Lanigan here in the United States with the introduction of the BMW M8 GTE in 2018. They tried to bring that program, not that program, that exact program, but they tried to bring a program over to the World Endurance Championship with Team M Tech, and unfortunately lasted one WEC season, and then that was no more. So it raced at Le Mans in 2018, 2019, and that was it. And we haven't seen that car race at Le Mans since. So, I'm not entirely surprised that they've seen more focus on an IMSA program at this point. I think that sort of just aligns with where they've been in the past 20 years. But I would be really interested to see if they try to do a couple of entries at Le Mans. I'm trying to remember in the past if Bobby Rahal has showed interest in going to Le Mans. I'm pretty sure he has.
Yes.
Yeah, Kyle can confirm that for me. I think quite a few of the manufacturers that are sort of big names over here in the United States have historically wanted to go to Le Mans. I know Chip Ganassi, that was on his bucket list with the Ford GT program back in 2016. He cited that he wanted to go to Le Mans. Yeah, Andretti as well.
Who is partnered with BMW and Formula E.
Correct. Penske said for a long time that he wanted to go race Le Mans as a team owner. And look where that's going now with Porsche. So that's cool. That's good news. And yeah, Ray Hall as well has showed interest in going to Le Mans. And obviously, Ray Hall Letterman has been running the BMW program for the past 2 decades at this point. So I'm certainly curious if that's what they're going to try to do with this. But for now, it does look like it is an IMSA-focused program. Now, if they do go to Le Mans, sorry, badly timed sip of water. If they do go to Le Mans, we're looking at, let's just do the list in my head here of manufacturers we could expect to see on the grid at Le Mans in 2023. And by the way, this is just confirmed manufacturers. Not confirmed for Le Mans, but confirmed that they are doing either a Le Mans hypercar or an LMDh program. I want to say we have Toyota, we have Peugeot. Got to correct my pronunciation on that because I got some flack for it. We have Audi, we got Porsche, we've got BMW, we've got Ferrari. I'm gonna forget these here because I'm just going off the top of my head. Who am I forgetting? Anybody? Oh, Acura / Honda. Audi and Porsche. I think I already said them, but I'm not too sure. But yeah, we've got a handful of them. I went over them on Twitter if you want to see it because that's where I expressed it a little bit better. Alpine is a little bit up in the air because right now they're running that grandfathered LMP1 car, which, as far as common regulation stands, won't be eligible after this season. So we'll have to see if they end up continuing with a full-blown Le Mans hypercar or if they drop that program entirely and go back to LMP2. That's remained one of the questions. And also, we don't know what type of engine this car is going to have yet. Oh, Glickenhaus, of course. I forgot Glickenhaus. Thank you. So where was I going on that? I completely forgot before that one. Oh yeah, so the unanswered questions. We don't know what type of engine it's going to have yet. I mean, we're looking at a car that's not going to make its debut for another year and a half-ish, a little bit more than a year and a half. And so, nothing on engine yet. As for the manufacturer, obviously we're talking the chassis manufacturer, I should say. This is LMDh, so we're looking for an LMP2 chassis that's going to be used as the baseline. From what I've heard from Daily Sports Car, Graham Goodwin, who, by the way, has been pretty strong when it comes to being ahead of the curve with these LMDh rumors, I must say. He is saying that Dallara will be the chassis manufacturer for that car. And trust me, I trust Graham Goodwin's word when it comes, if he says it with that confidence, I believe him. So it looks like Dallara might be the partner for that car. Dallara, we also expect, is going to be partnering with the next LMDh manufacturer I expect to make an official announcement, which would be Cadillac. Cadillac has said, it's all but confirmed in the truest sense of the term. I mean, Cadillac, I think, has gone as far as having an announcement ready, and then they sort of called it off. I'm not sure why. I don't think anybody really knows why they've called it off. At least anybody outside of Cadillac and GM themselves. But everybody in the industry right now is predicting that Cadillac is the next manufacturer to make an announcement. A lot of people were predicting that they would have made one this past weekend in Detroit because that's their home. We didn't get that, actually, so that was a little bit of a surprise to me. But I think that a manufacturer LMDh announcement or confirmation from Cadillac is imminent over the next couple of weeks, I'd hope. So I think that that's who we can expect next. But overall, I think the grid for Le Mans in 2023, that's my biggest focus is Le Mans, obviously. Not all of these manufacturers are confirmed for Le Mans, though, but even if you just look at IMSA, IMSA now has 4 confirmed manufacturers for 2023, and, we're highly expecting that 5th one to be coming in a couple of weeks here, which is more than they had at the introduction of the DPI era. So, yeah, I think it's extremely promising as we go into the next generation of prototype racing across the World Endurance Championship and from IMSA, which is very exciting to see. Some of the manufacturers that we've heard sort of thrown around a little bit, but haven't heard anything quite significant yet. I've heard the name McLaren thrown around a little bit over the past couple of weeks. And by the way, I'm not an insider here. Don't take anything I'm saying too seriously. I'm just regurgitating what I read on the internet. But McLaren's name I have seen thrown around a little bit. Now, I've also seen Lamborghini and Bentley, which the interesting thing about Bentley is the CEO seemed pretty adamant, I guess, about shutting down those rumors. As to going as far as saying they're just outright not true. The interesting thing about that, though, that I do want to talk about is it seems that for these Volkswagen manufacturers, we might have sort of this common platform when it comes to LMDh. Audi and Porsche are the only 2 VW, I guess, VW, I don't know the term, but they're both owned by Volkswagen that are entering LMDh at the time. They're the only 2 confirmed. And the latest rumors I have heard state that those cars will be on a very similar common platform. Not just chassis-wise, we're expecting both of those cars will be running with Multimatic chassis, but on an engine basis as well. The original rumors that came out when Audi announced their program said that Audi was interested in running their turbocharged 4-cylinder inline 4 from the DTM championship. Of course, that program got cut short when DTM went to GT3 regulations. Audi wanted to use that engine in their new Le Mans, or their new LMDh car. That is what I had heard, and I think that's what a lot of people were sort of running with. Latest news I have heard, or rumors that I have heard, state that they will both be running, Audi and Porsche would both be running the twin turbocharged Porsche Cayenne Derivan V8, which I talked with Joe about this a couple of weeks ago, actually. I guess it was around, a month ago at this point, about the prospects of that happening. At that point, it was sort of just an idea rather than a potential path that they're going down. But I think that would be a great shame if that's the route that they decided to go down, just because, at that point, how separate are the cars really? Sports car racing, the manufacturers, you want them to sort of be, in the cars, you want them to sort of be as diverse as possible. That's what makes it exciting. Even if the racing itself isn't necessarily the most exciting side-by-side product that you're going to see in the world of motorsports, the thing that makes sports car racing so interesting for me and millions of other people is the cars themselves and how different they are and how exciting they are. Once you sort of get those similarities on a certain plane so that they're very similar to each other, I think that sort of detracts a little bit from the point. But, certainly it does help for cost, but I think that it sort of doesn't follow in the true spirit of sports car racing as we know it. But anyway, how this ties into Bentley and Lamborghini is if we do see an announcement from those two manufacturers, or we see increasing interest from those two manufacturers in the future, would they be sharing the exact same platform as well, where they're both running, or even just one of them? If one of them shows interest in the future, are we going to see them leaning towards that Multimatic chassis and that twin turbo V8? Because if we get to that point where we have four VAG manufacturers competing alongside each other in the same championship, but they're only separated by the bodywork and the badge on their car, how interesting is that really? I mean, I've always been one for car count, but I think that there is something to be said there, that it's a little bit less interesting than it could be overall. But Kyle, I've been talking for a while here. I want to hear some of your thoughts on that as well, because I think that that's a unique prospect to endurance racing for sure, something that we haven't really seen before, at least on this scale.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, you know, each sanctioning body has been working on for years is the way to make racing the least expensive and have the most cars and better yet manufacturers on the grid. And it looks like sports car racing has kind of found that right now in LMDh, where teams can basically work off a similar chassis, and be able to rebadge it for multiple manufacturers, multiple entities, and it's very smart. But like you said, once you get to the point, I think, to where you're using the same engines, that's kind of where I would cross the line. I mean, that's where I draw the line. I mean,
Right.
yeah, I having the same chassis and then restyling it to look like a different car, I think is fine. But then once you start using the same engines, I mean, it's kind of the same thing we've seen in GT3 racing with the Audi and Lamborghinis.
Well, okay,
So,
but that's I don't think that's an entirely fair argument, because those are the engines that those cars use in the road cars, or at least they're derived from the engines that are
yeah.
used in the road cars. I mean, the Huracan and the R8 both use that. I think it's 5.2 liter naturally aspirated V10 in the road car. So I think that that's an argument on its own. But if you have a Lamborghini LMDh car, Lamborghini doesn't sell. I guess maybe their new SUV, the Urus or whatever, has probably has that twin turbo V8. Maybe it's a Cayenne derived engine in that road car as well. I don't know. I don't pay too much attention to Lamborghini's SUVs.
Lamborghini USV usually like literally has like a big old engine in it, doesn't it? I
I
thought it was
I
one of
was under
those.
the impression that what, like a V12.
I wouldn't go as far as like a V12, but I thought it had like a. It was one of those like what what Chrysler likes to do with their SUVs, where they have like the track hawk thing. I thought that the Lamborghini was like
Well,
that
it.
type of deal, where it was just like a beast.
All right. Well, let's just look this up because
Because the Cayenne's not. The Cayenne's not one of those like track day SUVs. I thought that Lambo was kind of going for that.
well, I quite frankly wouldn't call the Lamborghini a track day SUV. I think
I
it's a
wouldn't call any
I
SUV a
think it's a
track day SUV, but I
I
mean,
wouldn't either.
tell that to Chrysler.
Well, okay, so yeah, it is sold with a 4-liter twin turbocharged V8, which I think is the exact same capacity that they use in the Cayenne. So there you go. I guess you have a little bit of crossover there. But you know, I've already said everything that I need to say about it. I think, would it be welcomed if we had four Volkswagen manufacturers all competing side by side? If it meant that, in my opinion, I would still take it. I think there's enough to be said. I think, if we can get some Lamborghini styling cues, and especially Bentley. Bentley won Le Mans for the first time in 1924, the second running of the race. If they can come back for the centenary of that and really sort of stir up a crowd with that sort of idea. Bentley was very popular back in 2003, and that car was really just an Audi R8 closed cockpit. So, I think that it still would be interesting enough. And it's not a completely foreign concept, like I just said with the Bentley Speed 8 back in 2003, which was heavily derived from the R8. But I just don't want to see manufacturers going down this road because I don't think it follows in the true spirit of endurance racing, I guess, if you want to coin that term.
The one thing I am starting to really appreciate is the genius in what sports car racing has been doing over the last few years that I didn't understand at first. I had always given sports car racing a bunch of crap for getting something good and then just screwing it up somehow and then having to go to a new regulation every 4 years it seemed. It was just, like you let LMP1 die, you let this die, like this is gone now, this is gone. But when you follow something like IndyCar, where you have pretty much the same, formula, it was 2021. The last time we had a new chassis was 2012. The last time we had new engine regulations was 2012. And you've had the same manufacturers. Everything's been the same for how many years? And then you're going to a new regulation 10 years later, and you can't find a third manufacturer, and just
Well,
all of the interests and things that you want to happen won't happen. With sports car racing, if you change it up every couple of years, you're following what the manufacturers want. You're creating more interest in finding new ways and and most importantly, keeping the manufacturers happy and giving them something that they can see a return on. And what they're doing right now, and with the current regulations rolling out, with hypercar and LMDh, it's pretty great. Like you said, this goes back to what you said. I'll take this. I'll take the manufacturers, the Volkswagen Group doing what they're doing, with the same engines, and chassis, rather than, being stuck in a dying formula where you're just going to see manufacturers dip in the next few years. Anyways,
well, okay. So I've been doing some research while you went on about that. If we want to, give them the benefit of the doubt, and let's be fair here, the Lamborghini Urus, the Audi Q7, and I believe the Q8 as well, the Porsche Cayenne, and the Bentley Bentayga are four SUVs across the four different manufacturers. I guess five if you want to include that second Audi. All four of them, you can buy them with a 4.4-liter twin turbocharged V8, and it's, if it's not the exact same engine, I'm sure you can assume that it's very similar across all four different cars. So, is it fair for them to do it? Yeah, sure. You have a common platform. You have something that's, they can easily do it. It's good for marketing. It's cheap is the biggest thing. And they don't need to spend a ton of money on R&D competing against each other when they can all share the same platform. It makes sense from a corporate standpoint. I'll give them that. And actually, I'll give them more than that. I think from a corporate standpoint, it's actually pretty genius. But I've already said everything else that I need to say about it. I've given my opinions. Overall, I would welcome it. I would love to see four manufacturers, even if they're, very similar on cars, very similar to each other, I should say. The only flaw with it that I could see is you're trying to explain when the cars are on the grid. Look at this Porsche we have here. What chassis is that? It's a Multimatic chassis. What engine does it have? It's a 4-liter twin turbocharged V8. You walk, 6 feet up the road. We got a Lamborghini here. What chassis is that? It's a Multimatic chassis. It's got a 4-liter twin turbocharged V8. And then let's walk over to the Audi. It's a 4-liter twin turbocharged V8. I mean, you can definitely make it more interesting, but again, common platform. I think it makes sense. And we'll have to see if we hear any more rumblings from Audi, or not from Audi, from Bentley and Lamborghini down the road. Obviously, we'll keep you updated with any of that stuff if we hear it. Might make them easier to apply balance of performance as well. Yeah, I mean, that's certainly true, but I don't think that would be the primary reason for doing it. I think cost saving and keeping everything, I guess, as streamlined as possible makes the most sense. Now, I wasn't going to go over this in this episode, but I think, we're running into the final moments of this episode, and you sort of hinted at it, Kyle, and I do want to talk about it. I was going to save it for probably the next one, but I'll just bring it up here. We have LMDh now. We have the 5 confirmed manufacturers at this, or 4 but let's be real, 5 at this point in time. You brought up that IndyCar is still rolling with two manufacturers. They've been trying for a long time to get a third manufacturer. This is no secret. They've been trying really hard with the new engine regulations coming out in 2024 to get that third manufacturer, or maybe even more than 3. And it hasn't seemed to be incredibly successful. We've heard rumors over the years. We've heard, I think BMW was in the running at one point. Look where they ended up. We've heard Porsche at one point. Look where they ended up. We heard Ferrari at one point. Look where they ended up. All 3 of them have ended up in sports car racing. And, I think it was fair to assume that it was sort of confusing why. I think a lot of people were just sort of like, well, maybe they just don't value IndyCar as highly. Maybe, because IndyCar is an American-based championship, it's not really the same on the global scene. It doesn't really hold up as well in foreign markets as sports car racing might. Maybe that's the reason why. But I think I saw something this week on Twitter that explained it perfectly. If I ask you who won the Indianapolis 500 this year, who are you going to tell me?
Helio Castroneves. I see where this is going. This is perfect.
If I ask you who won the 24 Hours of Le Mans last year, what are you going to tell me?
Toyota.
Yep, that's it right there. Yep. And to the common man, let's just say the person who reads the headline, not the motorsports fan, but the person who reads the headline on TV or in the newspaper, it's going to say Helio Castroneves won the Indy 500. And they're not going to know a Honda won. Maybe it'll mention it in the article, but it's not going to be the headline. From a manufacturer standpoint, and let's say IndyCar did the exact same regulations, because that seems what, the funny part is LMDh seems to be what IndyCar has sort of been hypothesizing for their next set of regulations, where it's an off-the-shelf hybrid unit that's relatively low power. It's not a huge emphasis on hybrid power, but it's there, and we'll let the manufacturers bring the engine. And that's exactly what LMDh is. LMDh has only been a thing for a year now. We have 4, but again, technically, not technically, but let's just say 5 confirmed manufacturers. Well, IndyCar's sitting there with 2, and I think that's the reason why right there. I think you're not going to be able to attract manufacturer interest to the level that you can with sports car racing simply by design. When you think of sports car racing, you think about who won Le Mans, or you think about who won the 24 Hours of Daytona, the headline will always say, or at least most of the time, the headline will say that the manufacturer won those races rather than Indy.
You are 100% right, and you're making me sad and angry, because I could make this podcast an hour longer explaining how at the Indianapolis 500, the driver has become more important than the car, and it's because of spec racing, it's because of costs, it's because of media, driving pushing the drivers rather than the manufacturers and the cars. When the Indianapolis 500 was built on the cars, and when teams and different chassis manufacturers could build multiple Indy cars, have different chassis, different cars. Because when we talk about the Indy 500, this car won, this engine, this car and engine combination, and then this driver. I mean, it's a whole thing. It's sad. It sucks. It sucks. It really does.
Well, the other thing is, I think there's almost sort of a domino effect when you get manufacturer interest, because LMP1. Well, maybe this isn't a fair comparison, because LMP1's biggest issue is that it was just way too cost heavy. But LMP1 in 2015, you can look at, okay, when they got Porsche, it seems like 1 year later they got Nissan's interest. When you have manufacturers join and you get more discussion going on about manufacturers, that sort of just entices others to join. But I don't think manufacturers have been in the headlines, at least the mainstream headlines for IndyCar in years at this point. Maybe even, back when we had Toyota in the series close to 20 years ago. I think it's something that gets talked about, but maybe not talked about enough, and that's probably why they're struggling. I guess the moral of the story for me here is that they can almost do whatever they want with the regulations. They can gather 10 manufacturers at a table, say, what do you want? And they'll tell IndyCar exactly what they want, and they're still not going to be interested in running because by design, the manufacturer doesn't get as much publicity in IndyCar as it would in sports car racing. But that's just something I wanted to talk about because you sort of just opened the door with your comment about how IndyCar's been struggling to get manufacturers, and I did see that analogy this week on Twitter and really had to bring it up because I think that it solidifies perfectly why they've been struggling to get manufacturers while we see both Le Mans Hypercar and LMDh pick up a handful of manufacturers only a year into the running. So, shame, but I don't think there's quite too much they can even do about it right now. I think you're looking at a real
Yeah, I just
long-term
saw a
change
comment
there.
in the chat that said, with regards to the Elio and Toyota analogy, I think that comes down more to race format than anything else. And I thought about that because then you also think in sports car racing, an endurance race, you have multiple drivers, so you're not going to say this driver, and this driver won. Maybe with Fernando, you'd say, hey, Fernando won.
Correct.
But Indianapolis in the 500 was still built on the car rather than the driver. And the car, if it wasn't a spec chassis with just a different engine, it'd probably be a different story. You'd probably bring up which car won. You can make it interesting. And then he also went back on that statement because he forgot, because if you think about F1, it's not just Lewis Hamilton won, it's Mercedes won or uh, Ferrari, so there is also kind of a pull to that. But I mean, in IndyCar, with their next regulation in building being able to build an engine, what if you're a manufacturer and you're thinking about it, what are you going to get out of that? How much with how much you're putting in, to build an engine for the series for how many cars? What's your return on that? Like, what are you gaining from that? And I mean, it would kind of make sense if you're like a Ferrari or a Porsche and you want to, put the 500 on your resume. But I mean, it's just in the way racing is nowadays with, because the only reason LMDh is going so big because it's cost effective. When you know, s- cutting costs is so important and staying relevant is that spec hybrid and, is that all really worth it just to win the Indy 500? And I mean, obviously only two manufacturers think so.
Yeah, but you know what? Actually, if I had to give a cutthroat thing as to what I think IndyCar could potentially do, is really just open up the the cars a little bit more to more freedom of design. But the issue with that is,
I
I
had a
was
great idea on that a couple of years when this formula was introduced, because we had all these we had this idea, right, when the DW12 came around, that what was going to happen was not only were manufacturers and and basically anybody who wanted to could build bodywork. It was based on actually there might have been a multiple chassis deal, but what was also supposed to happen is remember when y it was not just aero kits. Aero kits was a thing that happened after this idea and this announcement and thing. But like if I was Roger Penske or Michael Andretti, and I wanted to build an aero kit for my car, just the bodywork, I could do that if I wanted to. If you you could have different engine manufacturers, and you could choose. And oh man, that would have been way cooler than the aero kits. But yeah, you could have had that. Could have opened up the cars, and anyone who wanted to throw money to make a uh, aero kit, you could do that. We also, it'd be cool if we had multiple manufacturers uh, in chassis. You know, eh, Back in 2012, we had how many, chassis manufacturers bidding? And
right.
Dallara was willing to build a factory in Indianapolis for their taxes, but they were the only ones willing, so they definitely got the. That's why they got the bid. But I don't know about that, man.
All right. Well, you know what? I think there's plenty to talk about with that subject. I think you and I and anybody could go on about that for hours. And I'll tell you what, I think there is a lot to go over there because BMW confirming their LMDh program this week really sort of opened the can of worms again. I was like, okay, something's up here because they just now solidified yet another manufacturer. It seems like we're getting a new LMDh confirmation, either LMDh or Hypercar. Seems like we're getting a new confirmation every single month. And I think some people within IndyCar are getting a little bit frustrated about it. So I'll tell you what. I think what we need to do, you and I, is we need to get Mr. David back on, you know, and bring this stuff up with him. You know, maybe on a
All we'd
slow.
have to do if that happened, well, all we'd have to do is just sit back and listen. It'd be a
Oh
2 hour
yeah,
podcast right in the time frame and just be him.
that's that exactly. But I think you and I have some ideas on what they could do. So I'll tell you what. On a slow news week, um, we can do that. We can spend, you know, hell, we can spend an hour talking about that if we want. Um,
I can quickly say one thing they shouldn't do, and that's, stick with the same formula and same chassis for another 10 years. But,
well, that's I think the biggest problem right there. But
the DW12's, man, so it's going to still be around like 2028. Is that a question mark?
but yeah, I do want to get into that in a future episode because I think there's plenty to talk about with that. So subscribe to the channel if you want to check out that
In
stuff in the
short,
future.
in short, I love IndyCar. The racing's great. The drivers are great. All of that's great. The product's amazing. Product could be better. Thumbs up. But like when it comes to looking into the future, yeah, we have a lot of cool drivers that are going to be around in the next, 10, 20 years. We're going to have a great field, lots of talent, lots of fun, right? Great racing. But as far as, manufacturers, which, by the way, the manufacturers, they're the ones who put money into the series. And that's where you are able to, pay the drivers and have big money into the series to, keep it going and keep people happy, keep people working, keep having fun. You need manufacturers and, big money people put it in, well, those guys aren't as interested and the future doesn't look that bright on that front. So that's short right there.
Yeah, like I said, we'll have to go in depth about that stuff in a future episode. But I'll tell you what, we've been an hour and 46 and a half into this episode. This is the longest episode since the one that brought back the podcast right before the Rolex this year, which was just shy of 2 hours. And we've held some people around here for quite a while. I think it's a good time to end the podcast. But barring any issues with my basement, we will be back next Tuesday. That's another thing I forgot to say. We got to switch this over to a Tuesday thing at 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time because Kyle has some other commitments to do on Monday nights now. So it will be Tuesday. Again, we're really bad at sticking to schedules. So there's a chance that does get switched around. You can follow us on our Twitter. It's up on the screen. It's at Rain Race Podcast. If you want any updates on when we're going to be doing an episode, you can also check out my my channel Discord. I don't have it in the description, unfortunately, but if you go to my channel banner on YouTube, it is there, and I can add it to the description in a few minutes here. I post updates and notifications in there as well as to when we're going to be doing a podcast, so you can go find us there. Anyways, for this episode, been going on for quite a while. I appreciate everybody who's tuned in because we've had a lot of chats to go over, a lot of discussion in this episode. We've had a pretty consistent concurrent viewer base. I appreciate everybody who tuned in. Hope to see you next week for another episode of the Rain Race Podcast. Take care.